Welcome everyone to this penultimate session for the day, I think. We're pretty close to the graveyard shift, but have no fear, we have a fantastic panel to entertain everyone. As Sophie said, my name is Ingrid Silva. I'm a partner at Dentons. Dentons is a global law firm, which makes me a lawyer, but I'm still a nice person, I promise. So before we kick off with this session, which is about every company is a media company, I want to start with a show of hands from the audience. Who in the audience thinks that, yes, every company is a media company? Okay, roughly half. Who thinks not every company is a media company? Okay. So now let's have a show of hands from the panelists. Who up on stage thinks that every company is a media company? Just one. Okay.
Excellent.
So the rest of you think that not every company is a media company?
That's right.
Right? Okay.
Is there another category?
I don't know, you tell me.
The schizophrenic character. Yeah, I know. Okay, no, I'm definitely on that.
Every company may be confused. Okay, so we're going to come on to that in a second. Before we do that, could I very briefly ask each of you to introduce yourselves, which company you come from, and what your world looks like, just in a couple of minutes. So Carrie, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. I work for Sony Pictures and Television. I oversee strategy and mergers and acquisitions for International, which is a U.S. company's way of saying anything outside the U.S.
It's true, though.
So we have about 100 television channels, and we also produce content in about 25 different countries around the world. We also distribute that content internationally to different networks or OTT providers. So we are in the business of content creation, distribution, and aggregating audiences to watch that content.
Yeah, so my name's Marcus. I'm the president of our UK and Australia businesses at BBC Worldwide. BBC Worldwide is a subsidiary of the BBC. And very similar to you, in IP creation and distribution of that content through just about every route to market you can imagine, from magazines, books, DVDs, all the way through to EST, download to own, television channels or sales. I guess what we do in essence is we take a bit of intellectual property, whether that's a program that you love, and we try to extend fans' enjoyment of that and everything and everywhere they want to see it.
So before we introduce JC, I should just point out that JC is not Mark from Vice. Mark has man flu, so JC has valiantly jumped in.
I think you asked me
place.
because I look like I could work at Vice. That's why you asked me. I said invite the guy with the beard.
So JC, you were up on stage earlier on, but for the benefit of people who didn't catch your earlier session, if you could just very briefly.
So yeah, JC Oliver, I work for AOL Microsoft, was at Microsoft for 8 years, ran global creative and innovation. I think we all know what Microsoft does. We've got a bunch of consumer-facing platforms, Skype, MSN, Xbox. You just took Jackie Lee Joe, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, she's amazing. And I come up with ideas for brands and munge those together. We just got acquired by AOL, our part of the business. AOL is just been bought by Verizon, and they're re-establishing themselves as the sort of third global network behind Facebook and Google with regards to advertising. So yeah, they're on the comeback trail. And I do everything ex-US, like yourself.
Hi there, I'm Nick Cohen. I'm VP for Content Strategy and Brands at a company called Little Dot Studios. We're a startup that's focused on content creation and distribution on digital platforms, so primarily YouTube, Facebook, and all of those other platforms that are now sort of embracing video. And there's kind of two sides to what we do, really. One is we work with people who already own content, so big studios and production companies like ITV Studios, Sky, Cartoon Network, those kind of guys, and we help them to clip up and distribute their material and track it and monetize it on platforms like YouTube. And then the other side of what we do is we work with brands and content companies to create content and also manage those kind of channels for them in those digital environments. So we sort of span both sides of it.
So Nick, I want to stay with you for a moment because you were the only one on stage who put your hand up and said, yes, every company is a media company. So
thought it'd make for a better panel.
Oh, I thought you really meant it. No, seriously, talk us through your thinking as to why you have that view.
Well, I think there's lots of ways you can define what a media company is, but I think the reason why every company these days needs to think like a media company is that if you think about the traditional world, how does a company get out there? It was about physical location and physical visibility. So the visibility for any brand or company was about your position on the high street or your position on the shelves of the supermarkets or whatever. And that was dictated by contracts, your property portfolio or how good you are at doing distribution deals. In the new digital world that we're all now living in, the primary point of visibility for most companies is search, whether that's Google or YouTube. And what dictates your visibility in search? Increasingly, it's your content. So I think for all companies, they do need to think like media companies because whether or not they realize it or appreciate it, it's their engagement with content that's going to help to define their visibility in the digital space.
Harry, what's your view on?
You don't think so?
Come to you in a
No, I
second,
just gave
Tracy.
him. I was, yeah. Do you want to?
I'd like to hear Carrie's view on
You
that
go first. You go
and then
first.
we're going to jump to you.
Yeah.
I think for a very long time, the way that brands accessed their audience or their consumer was through a small group of mass media companies, right? So they leveraged a third party to help for brand and awareness and to communicate a story, right? Brands tell stories, and media outlets were a way for them to tell their story very effectively. But the ability for brands now to create content themselves, and then all the technologies that a lot of people in this room are probably developing allow platforms for them to be able to distribute it in a very cost-effective way that wasn't possible before. And then they can also start to analyze it. So there is the possibility that brands can become very effective at both creating content, distributing content, and analyzing that content, and how it's being received. And they can be kind of in control of their own destiny. I think the reason why I don't think every company is a media company is because while I agree that they should aspire to be, that requires an entire shift in the way in which you function as a business, from the way in which you recruit people, from your processes, to the way you think about your brand, to the technologies that you invest in. And I think there's so much about that just saying, oh, I can become a media company because I can create content and put it online, doesn't mean you're a media company. I think there's so much more that goes into effectively communicating a story.
Okay, so JC, you're nodding.
I was positively, just so I thought it wasn't a negative. I know you looked at me like it was a negative one. I think they need to think about it, right? But not every company is. So we're just about to move house, right? And in my house at the moment, I've got this screw drain thing, where you hit the button, it pops it up. And for about 2 years, it's not worked. It's just been an empty drain. So I went and bought some. I went into Homebase yesterday. And the guy knew what it was. He said it's an M6 nut. I was like, great. Anyway, I got back. I could not work it out. I don't know what I was doing. Anyway, the point is that company is not a media company. They sell nuts and washers. They don't need to think about creating content. They're pretty happy selling nuts to a couple of suppliers. They have no aspiration to do anything else, and neither should they. At the other end of the spectrum, companies, and I work with a lot of them, one at the moment, Pepsi, right? Pepsi is going, how do we change the way that we think about selling fizzy pop, right? And Coca-Cola do things in a really interesting way. And so I had a meeting with them recently, and they want to create their brand is a platform. They want to diversify into creating content, into creating pieces of art, into creating T-shirts, clothing line. They're diversifying because the way that audiences interact with their brand is different to buying nuts. buying washers, not those type of nuts. There's a number
But
of-
the whole reason
So-
for doing all of those things is still to sell beverages, or not.
At the end of the day, you look at someone like Red Bull, right? They make more money now off of their media division than they do off of the actual product itself.
Right.
So not every company needs to be a media company. I think there is definitely a thought process into shifting into how do we engage with audiences in different ways. And I won't go too deep into that, but the other point is that, at the end of the day, a brand and a company is actually formed in someone's mind. So Pepsi does just sell Fizzy Pop, or it sells Quaker Oats, or it sells Doritos, it sells chips. But at the end of the day, the Pepsi brand is formed in people's minds.
What do you think people think when you say Red Bull? Do you think you say motor racing, media company, soft drink company? What do you think they say?
I mean, personally, I still think soft drink because that's my heritage. But I think if you spoke to some younger people, I hate using the term millennials, but if you spoke to some younger people, they may well understand it as the flu tag thing. And so their touch point and their understanding of the brand is very different. Mm-hmm. And I guess you could ask a question: why did Red Bull need to do it? Right? Why did Red Bull need to become a media company? I don't know the answer to that. I know that it definitely drove more sales, and then there was obviously a tipping point where they went, shit, hang on a minute, this creation of having people jump into the water creating planes and supporting an F1 team actually creates a much more strategic approach to brand value. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you in terms of thinking, but not every company does need to be a media brand.
There are two themes that are emerging from the comments we've had so far. Firstly, it's about brand to a certain extent, and therefore if you have a brand that is beyond distributing nuts and bolts that you want to somehow scale and grow, you do need to at least think like a media company and engage in media. And secondly, we're seeing the possibility of brands entering adjacent sectors, if you like.
Well, that's probably where the BBC's kind of story comes in, because I think that media brands have two things in their DNA that can be replicated. You can make them, you can copy them, and that's about tradition, and that's about content. So, look, the BBC, all the way back to 1922, the first company to do a radio broadcast. 1937, the first company to do an outside TV broadcast. 67, one of the first companies to do a colour TV broadcast. And then recently with iPlayer in 2007. So the point is that brands that have a heritage and have been known for content creation and content distribution just keep doing what they do. But at the heart of it is the content that you create, whether that's Sony or whether it's the BBC.
Yeah.
We want to be famous for premium quality content.
Right.
And that's what the punter thinks about when you say BBC.
Right. But arguably, I mean, the fact that a brand has a particular history is neither here nor there. I mean, look at Nokia. They used to be about rubber boots and paper mills. And we've just sort of talked about the fact that brands can transition into new areas potentially. But I'm guessing that, at least this side of the panel, Carrie and Marcus, you would feel quite strongly that, given brand history and brand values and corporate culture and ways of doing things, there is still something very particular to being a media company. So the question for the two of you, I guess, is who are your competitors these days? Is it each other? Or?
Yes,
That's it.
Can I say one on the first point,
Yeah.
which is about, and something you brought up, which is about culture. So Coke will probably always sell Coke, but the culture in which Coke lives, our world, evolves and changes every decade, right? And so as a brand, I need to stay involved in that cultural shift, and I need to make sure that if that culture shift is changing, that my product has a seat at the table, right? That it's part of that conversation, a part of that shift. And I think brands can leverage what they know to provide information about that cultural shift. But that's where you start to cross the line about quality, which is the point you raised. And also, to be fair, quantity. I think what makes a media company is the quality at which they can produce content and the quantity at which you can produce content. And there are very few exceptions of which a brand can focus on its product and at the same time create quantity and quality of content.
That's interesting, but I guess quality, at least, certainly not quantity, but quality is arguably a very subjective notion.
Yeah, when I was saying about heritage and quality, I wasn't suggesting that any other companies don't have their own quality or their own heritage, or that they can't create quality content.
Right.
My point was more germane. It was that it's the quality and quantity of what you do, it's the routes to market, it's the assets that you have that allow you to do. That's over 100 TV channels.
Right, but I'm going to push you a bit further on this, because I mean, if I look at sort of what kids these days are watching, you know, video bloggers and all that sort of stuff, to me it looks like absolute garbage, candidly. And there's huge volumes of it. So I think it's fair to say that we are seeing a trend of sort of, I guess, lowering of barriers to entry and access to audiences of some description, and arguably, and Nick, it'd be interesting to get your take on this, disintermediation of certain...
Yeah.
So it sort of brings me back to the point, who are your competitors, irrespective of the fact that we would all agree that what you produce is high quality and high volume and so on?
I can just say that, I mean, that term you just used, disintermediation, is one that's been bandied around since the 90s in this kind of digital area. And what does that mean, really? It means breaking down of the thing that sits between that company and its audience, really. Fundamentally, that's what it's about. And if you roll back 30 years, unquestionably, as I said at the start, if a brand or a company wants to be known, it's got two options. It either puts up a sign on the high street and opens a shop and hands out leaflets or whatever, or it goes to the media who stand between it and a wider audience.
Yep.
The point I'm trying to make, and I don't disagree with anything really, I'm not suggesting that every brand can go out there and make a flipping feature film or whatever. What I do think, though, is actually we're in an era now where companies directly interface with media in a completely different way. So whether that's through mobile touch points, whether that's through new forms of outdoor, whether that's through directly connecting to their audience on platforms like YouTube or Facebook in exactly the same way as you guys do, we have to recognize that it's a whole different world, and brands, while they're not, I'm not suggesting that every brand is a high quality content studio. That would be crazy. But I do think that every brand has to think about... We're here if they want to be. No, joking aside, I think every brand has to think about media in a way that they didn't 20 years ago.
Let me build on that, because here's the meta point to when I talk to brands, right? Is that, and I heard a great quote the other day, and I can't remember who it was from. It might have been from Rory Sutherland, but I don't think it was. But anyway, it was this. It was, your customers just happen to be people that buy your brand when they're not buying other brands, right? So basically, let's not pretend that anyone loves your brand. Someone said, brands, no one, think about how many people love you, really love you, really love you.
Maybe two.
There you go, right? And it's the same with brands. You don't really love brands. You just buy them based on the fact of sometimes the coffee tastes better from Dowie Egberts than it does from Nescafe. So what becomes really important in this world is your touch points, and your media touch points become really important, and that's why marketing is so goddamn important, because whether you're producing mobile apps, whether you're producing a retail store, whether you're producing an ad that goes on TV or an ad that goes online, the marketing department becomes all powerful because you have to manage your personality, which is your brand. So that's why it becomes so important for brands, is because if I'm selling, let's go back to cola. If I'm selling cola, A brand, and I'm selling cola, B brand, the Pepsi taste test, remember that? When people used to go, can you taste the difference? And, they do it with Lidl now. I can't taste the difference in Lidl, Coke, between, all this stuff. It's about the brand personality. And guess what? That's a media touch point. That's why it's important. But the guy who's selling widgets or the washers for he doesn't care. It comes down to a cost issue. So the companies that come down to personality need to become media companies, and the ones that don't really need to bother because it's done on cost and supply.
I don't
And
know
I think
about
that's
that.
always been the case. What's different now is that technology allows brands to access consumers directly in a way that they could never do before.
Correct, and that,
the
to your
very-
point, that's why the search piece is important, because I do agree with you on search. If it comes down to cost and I'm searching for a cheaper washer than another cheaper washer, I will go to Bing. It's the other search engine, by the way. I will go to Bing and look for it based on that. So
And
I do
guess
agree with you from that
if we
perspective.
sort of extrapolate that point to the sort of logical, not conclusion, but if you build on that, the slightly uncomfortable question, at least for Carrie and Marcus, is, at what point do those brands who start having all these media touch points and become very popular start becoming a threat
I don't think
to traditional
that-
brands? But I'm going to park that there for 2 seconds because I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. Does anyone have any comments or questions in the audience at this point? One over here. Is there a microphone?
She's coming.
Hi, thank you, everybody. My name is David Gross, and I'm a founder of a crowdsourcing startup. And so I kind of have a broad question, mainly for the IP people. But how are you working with or trying to strategize with startups? Pretty general question.
Yeah, so we have, I'd say why and then one of the things that's came out of it. So we have a small startup incubator inside BBC Worldwide called BBC Labs. And so we identify small companies and we invite them in, we give them office space, we give them support around finance, IT, accounts, all that sort of stuff. Where we're slightly different is we don't take a percentage equity in their company for that. Yeah, we let them co-site with us and we try and get them to help our businesses out. So an example that came out of one is we've just done a pile of stuff with two internet guys called Casper and Joe. Casper and Joe, YouTube sensations, 10 million fans, massive on Facebook. One single problem, they're making no money. Making no money. So we get involved with them, we say to them, look, let's do something together. The first thing we do is make a DVD. We happen to have a camera crew spare, which was Top Gear. So we send them out around Europe, we do a video. And that video, since we've launched it, is the highest pre-sale video on Amazon. It's number 3 in the charts. And the point about it being is you can innovate digitally with people who want to be brands, but sometimes the only way for them to make money is back up the value chain at the analog end. Because no matter what we do, the single biggest way to do a unit of profitability in media is still DVD.
Is it really?
Yeah, still DVD.
And how long do we think that's going to last?
Well, I think we'll sell a couple of million this Christmas. I think you'll do twice the amount we'll do.
Yeah.
And it'll probably half-life again over the next 2 or 3 years.
I actually thought about throwing my DVD player away the other day. I was like, do I ever use that anymore?
Well,
There you go.
It'll be a collectible one day.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Can I just respond to the chap as well? So it's all about building an ecosystem, right? So for me, when I respond to brands around coming up with a solution, there's always we can deliver an audience, and what startups want is eyeballs, right? So your company, I mean, you'll probably be jumping over people to get more eyeballs to an awareness around your product or your service. Maybe not jumping, just skipping. So what AOL Microsoft supply is like over 1 billion people around the world to a particular engagement, and if it's a service or a product, we can build that into the solution and say we're both winning because whatever your product is or whatever your service is, if that's germane to the entire solution, you're going to get the eyeballs, we get the solution, and we both share on the IP. So it's about building an ecosystem because there's so many great ideas and companies out there who are dying for eyeballs that we can't go around buying them all. To your point, it's about engendering them with our knowledge and skill set, and I'm surprised that it's still DVD, so there you go.
I think the one thing, though, to make the distinction is between advertising and content. And I think one of the things that we struggle with a little bit when we work with brands and startups is that they want to get their product visible But that's advertising, and we're actually not in the business of advertising. We're in the business of entertainment, right? So we create content that's fun. And now, what the goal that we try to accomplish is, does your product fit into this entertainment environment or whatever feeling or mood we're trying to create? Does our mood for this film, be it dark or light or whatever it is, match with your mood for your product? And so there's a difference between, what we all, particularly young people, very much see as, wow, that was an advertisement for Samsung in that movie as Bond is like showing you.
So that's a very interesting distinction. And there was a session earlier today on advertising where someone made the observation that advertising is most successful when it doesn't feel like advertising.
Right.
So where are the boundaries and so on. So we have literally 3 minutes left. So I'm going to grab the... Oh no, we've got a question here. So you can have the last question.
I love having the last word. So here's a question, or is it an observation that I'd like you to comment on? If you look at most companies that we think of as media companies, they're principally mass media companies. Mm-hmm. Mass media is unraveling, and I believe that everybody kind of acknowledges that if you look at what were marketing vehicles, they were very much put down as shouting at individuals without really thinking about context. What we're now looking at is trying to create one-to-one conversations with people that are relevant, topical, and useful. Now, you may object or you may not agree with me, but my sense is if we're accepting that mass media is unraveling, is it the question about what is a media company and therefore what is the new media company, and therefore is every company who's not in media going to have to suck up media in a much greater way than they ever did in the past?
Okay, so I just fundamentally agree with mass market is unraveling, so I just have to go after that for a minute. I don't believe mass market is unraveling. I think it's evolving and it's changing. But for a brand, there is nothing out there, nothing, that rivals a mass market television commercial still today. There's no way to reach a broad audience with such awareness and effectiveness and there's no other avenue that compares to it. Now, is one-on-one conversation important? Absolutely. And are there avenues to have those one-on-one conversations? Yes, there is. And can that teach you a lot about your brand and how to evolve your brand or fix your brand or change your brand? Yes. But if you want to get your brand out there and you want someone to know about Coca-Cola, a television commercial is still today and will be for the next 10 years the absolute best way to do it. And there's no report, there's no research out there that will tell you differently.
I don't think anyone would dare disagree with Carrie.
Just a quick point on it. I broadly agree with you. If people could get down to a one-to-one conversation with a consumer, they would. One of our biggest advertisers is Rolex. Now, Rolex hate when you call them an advertiser. They want to be a partner. They want to tell their story through your medium so it excites their customer. And if you can do that one-to-one, then why not? It's the best way to do it. We tend to do it mass.
And I think there's, just the last point, I think there is, or maybe you want to talk, there's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum across it. So AOL just produced a show called Citizen Mars, which is about these 200,000 people. It's down to, we're going to profile 5 people that are going to Mars, all nutters. It's a one-way ticket, never coming back. I don't know why people are doing it. That's quite mass. It's interesting to a certain audience. It's created by Engadget, which is one of the AOL brands, so it's quite techy. We've got another show called Power Shift, which is focusing on Generation Y, like why do they care? So you can kind of get personalized on the content side to some extent. The key here, which is very different, and we talked about this on my panel earlier, is the programmatic distribution of that content, because you can target the audience to reach the right person at the right space and the right time who happens to be 18 to 34, who's interested in science and tech. So the content you can create with a broader brushstroke, but then it's the targeting and the distribution which has changed because of digital. So I think we live in a different world now, both on the content and distribution. That's it. I'm stopped talking.
Thank you. Nick, I would have loved to have given you the last word, but we have run over time. So could you all, actually before we finish up, quick show of hands, who thinks every company is a media company now?
Or
Okay,
less.
well, there's
less.
a bit of a shift
Yes,
there.
we've done well, guys. We've done well. We finish on a high.
Excellent. Could you please join me in thanking our
Yeah.
panel in the
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.